Welcome to Pints and Politics. We are back with you tonight with another virtual edition, the first Pints and Politics of 2022. You thought you were done with seeing us online, but we've returned to virtual just because of our friend Omicron. But it could be worse, right? You know, we've got our beverages, we've got our politics, and we've got a great panel tonight. We have a special guest with us tonight. Erin Murphy is the Gazette's new Des Moines bureau chief. And right now he's covering the legislative session, which we'll get to. But throughout the year, he covers his coverage leads much of our work on state government there. And we'll ask him more about himself later in the program tonight. But I wanted to first introduce our other panelists. Kicking off this 2022 Pints and Politics season, we have Todd Dorman, Gazette Insights and Opinion Editor. James Lynch, Gazette political reporter, and Adam Sullivan, Gazette columnist. I'm Erin Jordan, the Gazette's investigative reporter, and I'll be the moderator for tonight. If you've got questions, and I know you do because we've got some of them that have already come in, please submit them in the blue and gray box below the video, and those will kind of trickle into us as we go through the show tonight, which will be about an hour, give or take. I think we've got some good questions here too, so maybe we'll be going a little longer than that. Let's just start off with the big news of the week on the national front. The U.S. Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer officially announced today he will retire in June after sitting on the court since 1994. At 83, Breyer's been pressured to step down so President Joe Biden can make an appointment during his tenure. I wanted to just talk with the group. There's a lot of angles we could hit on this subject, but if you guys would, maybe highlight a little bit about who President Biden has said he might consider appointing.
The president said during the campaign that he would appoint a Black woman if he had the opportunity to appoint a Supreme Court or nominate a Supreme Court justice, So there's a few names being thrown around. One of them that I think has kind of risen to the top is Ketanji Brown Jackson, who she was confirmed last year to a federal judgeship, and she drew every Democrat supporter and 3 Republicans when she was confirmed to that position. So that suggests that she would be pretty widely accepted, or at least able to get to the 50%. And they only need 50 plus 1 to do this. They don't need 60. And so I think that there's concerns that the moderate Democrats might hold something like this up, but I think the Democrats have been pretty united when it comes to court picks. I don't know if any of them have really objected to hardly any of Biden's court appointments. So certainly there could be pitfalls, but I think that they will get someone confirmed without too much trouble.
And the other interesting name that's surfaced is Judge J. Michelle Childs from District Court, U.S. District Court judge in South Carolina. She's supported by Representative Jim Clyburn, who you may remember Clyburn's endorsement of Biden before the South Carolina primary sort of put his campaign back on track. And so his opinion may matter to the president. She graduated, she earned her law degree from the University of South Carolina, which means she would be one of the rare appointments that doesn't have an Ivy League degree. There's been a lot of, complaints that the court's packed with Yale and Harvard and those elite schools. And it would be, some folks think it would be nice if they broaden their the academic background of justices might be broadened, and that would, be more of an asset to the court.
One of the things that argues for Jackson is that President Biden actually interviewed her before nominating her to the circuit court, and I'm not that familiar with this judicial process, but apparently that's unusual for the president to personally interview a nominee to the circuit court. So I'm hearing people talk about her as sort of a more equal than the other people whose names are being mentioned. I think, the other thing about this whole judicial nomination process is that a lot of people are looking at it as a way for Biden to reset his presidency. He's a year into the presidency. Things have not gone his way for the most part. And this is something that most Democrats will get on board with. There may be a few holdouts, a few progressives who aren't happy with his choice if he picks somebody who is sort of in the center of the legal, in legal thought. But as Adam was saying, I can't imagine Democrats torpedoing this. And it's possible that there will be some Republicans who will support a Biden nominee to the court. At one time, that was not unusual for the minority party to support presidential nominees. Maybe we can get back to that.
And to that, James, I don't see President Biden picking anyone who would worry any of those maybe more moderate Democrats. It wouldn't be his style to all of a sudden pick a name out of the hat that, is considered a far more liberal justice or someone who would, upset someone within the Democratic caucus. I think that would go against the grain of Joe Biden in general. And as you said, certainly at this moment when some of the bigger agenda items he's tried to tackle haven't been successful, he wouldn't do something that would, threaten this.
The first thought I had when I heard about Breyer's retirement was, we've got less than 3 years of Biden's term left. I don't know if maybe we should just wait on this Supreme Court appointment.
Yeah.
Well, that's one thing that I was looking back, and Amy Coney Barrett was nominated, approved, everything in 35 days in 2020. So I wonder, do you think that this, nomination and vetting and approval process will be that fast?
Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, is saying a month from the time he gets the nomination until confirmation. So, I mean, he's looking at it on that sort of a fast track, if you will. Now, Republicans may try to slow walk this. Both parties may want to slow down a little bit, give themselves more time to raise money off of the judicial fight. It's a good fundraiser for both parties. And I think, Republicans will make some noise about whoever the nominee is, about perhaps being too liberal, not being a originalist or a strict constructionist, or not constitutional enough. But it's probably possible to do it in a month. I don't. It's one of those things. I don't know what Republicans gain by fighting it. I mean, they have to make some opposition because that's what opposition parties should do. But on the other hand, it looks pretty clear that Biden will get his nominee appointed or confirmed to the court. So do you want to drag out the process and fight this process and then lose? Other than the funds you raise, I'm not sure you gain anything.
Well, this isn't going to change the fundamental political makeup of the court ideologically. I mean, this is a fairly liberal justice retiring, going to be replaced by another liberal justice. Republicans have the majority on the court, so of course they'll fight and they'll complain and they'll point out flaws with the nominee, but I don't see this as being the sort of pitched battle that's going to push into the summer or anything. I think he's going to make his nomination at the end of February, it sounds like, and probably by sometime in March he'll probably have a justice appointed.
By that time, we'll be deep into the war in Ukraine, and nobody will be paying attention to this.
Yeah. Who knows what will be happening at that point.
James, quit jumping ahead. We're going to get to Ukraine
Sorry.
in just a minute, but I wanted to.
I would rather not go to Ukraine, by the way, right now. So.
Not literally, but Senator Chuck Grassley is the ranking Republican on the Senate Judiciary Committee. I was hoping that you guys could shed some light on what role that committee plays in this process.
They will vet and vote on the nominee before it goes to a full Senate vote, which that'll be, we talk about Republicans maybe try to hold up the process or at least lash out at the nominee. I think that's where you'll see a lot of that, because that's where they sit at the dais and get chances to question the nominee. So Democrats have still have the majority in the Senate. They're still able to move things forward. So I don't necessarily vote see a big clash there, but that's where you'll get people grandstanding and that type of thing.
Okay. So I saw an opinion piece in The Hill yesterday that said, quote, "No one would be surprised if Biden were a one-term president." And then last week, there was the kind of marathon news conference in which President Biden was kind of grilled upon, 1 year of his being in office. What factors would you guys say right now are taking the biggest toll on his favorability ratings?
I would say the fact that he hasn't been able to deliver on many of the things that he talked about in the campaign. Now, I don't know that it's unusual that a president doesn't deliver everything in the first year. For the most part, it would be impossible to do that. But, infrastructure really is this one big win. Build Back Better is stalled. And I think a lot of people look at it and say, like, maybe if you had broken this into smaller pieces that, both Republicans and Democrats could support, you would have gotten some of those things done by now, rather than sort of building up a series of defeats. Ask Joe Manchin what he can support and do that. And then ask him, what else can you support, and move on. The other thing is the withdrawal from Afghanistan went very badly, and people hold the president accountable for that.
Well, I think the withdrawal from Afghanistan is where things really started to go south. You've got the pandemic, which, the president ran on doing a far better job than Donald Trump in bringing the pandemic under control. We've had variants that, have occurred. The adoption of vaccines that I think most of us thought at the time when those vaccines came out that, everybody's going to want to get vaccinated. Well, we weren't exactly correct about that. There were quite a few people that have resisted vaccines, and quite a few people around the world that haven't had a chance to get vaccinated. And so the variants are always a possibility when people remain vulnerable to the illness. You've got inflation. I mean, we've got, that's eaten into, we've had some robust economic growth. People have seen their wages increase, but inflation has eaten into those gains. And as James said, Democrats are disgruntled about things that haven't been accomplished. So, all in all, there's a lot of factors that have come together to thwart the progress on several fronts, and he's taking a beating in public opinion, particularly among independents, which is he's going to need to both sort of hold, potentially hold as many seats as he can in Congress, and then maybe get reelected in 2024 should he run. So, yeah, it's been sort of multiple big problems that he hasn't been able to solve, and he was elected to be sort of this no drama president after 4 years of Donald Trump, and we've still had quite a bit of drama.
Yeah, I think we're also in an era where presidents are just going to be unpopular. The last few presidents have, set records or approached records for, being for polarization or for disapproval. And so I don't want to say that, the climate is worse than it's ever been in the United States, because we had a civil war where people actually killed each other. And so we shouldn't say it's necessarily novel or new, but it is worse than it has been in the recent past. And I think we're also in an era of negative partisanship, where people, maybe somewhat align with their own political affiliate, but they're just against the other guys. And so when you have, a core of group who's going to be against the president no matter what, and then you're, working with this, swing voters or independents or moderates, it's not that hard to swing them over. And so I don't think Joe Biden should run for re-election. I think, one, he's too old, and two, I think that it would be, I think he would lose. I think even to Donald Trump, he would probably lose. So hopefully he is a one-term president, but the next president will also be unpopular.
Yeah, that was exactly what I was going to say too, Adam. We're just kind of in that year, and it's not just the presidency. A lot of big institutions look at the favorability ratings of Congress in recent years, and the presidency is starting to catch up to that kind of nosedive in the view of the public. So these records will continue to be broken for the foreseeable future for all those reasons that Adam listed. And I do think to also piggyback on what Todd said, I think of all the things, I wonder how much the pandemic is hurting President Biden, just from the standpoint of it's still going on. It's still something that people are having to deal with. And so when you ask him, do you think the president's doing a good job? That the fact that we're still having to wrestle with this hurts the president, because as you know, the leader of the country is the chief executive. Whether that's fair or not, I'm not commenting on. I just wonder how much that kind of the degree to which people are worn out by this thing is hurting the president when you talk about things like that.
Well, in addition to being worn out by the pandemic, it's just it exacerbates all the divisions. I mean, not only are we worn out by it, but now we're upset by somebody wearing a mask or not wearing a mask, those that are vaccinated, those that aren't vaccinated. It's just like there are more points of conflict, and the more points of conflict you have, the worse it is for the people in office. I mean, because they haven't fixed it. They didn't. They haven't solved the pandemic. They haven't changed my flat tire. They haven't done anything for me.
I would just add briefly on the pandemic that the variant is obviously not Joe Biden's fault, but I think his response to the pandemic has been stupefying. He came into office as someone who's going to take it more seriously, and then it took a full year, and actually we're still waiting for him to send us each like 2 tests and 2 masks. And so it's like it doesn't really make sense if you came into office as the people who are going to turn the pandemic around. I get the conditions didn't necessarily allow for that. Hopefully we're on the edge of it, or we're going to on the decline soon. But it's not going to do me much good to have these couple home tests and these couple masks as the Omicron is waning. So that doesn't make sense to me.
Well, Todd said he didn't want to go to Ukraine. So we're going to talk about term limits instead. There's been a lot of conversation about this on the national level. About having term limits for members of Congress. Abby Finkenauer, who's running for U.S. Senate against Chuck Grassley, said his 47 years in office is, quote, too damn long for anybody. I think there was a recent survey done in Indiana where 3/4 of the folks polled said there should be some sort of limit for people in office. I wanted to ask the panel, are term limits a good idea? And if so, how long should people be allowed to serve?
I'll start this one. In general, I've always kind of, and this is just my opinion, we're asking here, so this is Erin Murphy. This isn't Erin Murphy, Gazette, Des Moines bureau chief. I've always felt like the ballot box is the ultimate term limit tool. I get the reasons that people would like to see term limits put in place. But I would personally like to see Americans more involved in the political process and more, interested in the political process, to where if these people who are staying in office forever are causing trouble or aren't doing the right things, then you take care of that by voting them out. That's kind of my personal feelings on it. When you analyze, or you at least talk to people about, would it improve things? Would it make things better? There's different minds of the subjects, and one of the things different minds on the topics. And one of the things people often say is, well, if you term limit the representatives, then that just transfers the power to, the lobbyists or the bureaucrats, the people who can stay around forever still. And then that just gives them more influence instead of the people who are actually being elected by the public. So it's an interesting and ongoing discussion. I don't know whether it has any traction now than it used to. I guess we'll see.
I think one thing that gets overlooked here is that I think seniority is getting increasingly important because the legislative process is so out of whack in Washington, and so they don't vote on stuff, they don't bring amendments, they don't really debate stuff. They make bills behind the scenes with a handful of leaders, and then they bring those out for a vote, and they already know that they have the votes to do it. So it's not a deliberative body, neither the House or the Senate. And so that makes seniority much more important. And Senator Grassley has even said, he says he supports term limits, but if there aren't term limits, why would he give away his seat and all this status that Iowa has in the U.S. Senate? If Democrats, if he's got colleagues, Leahy and Feinstein and whoever, who are just as old as him, basically. So I think that's an interesting point. That I don't think Grassley's necessarily a hypocrite for saying he supports term limits, but he's also the poster child for term limits, as the Democrats put it, because you wouldn't unilaterally disarm. So I think if the Congress got back, I don't know how you do this, but if the Congress got back to actually deliberating and actually legislating, I think that it would be easier for folks not to stay in Congress for 40 and 50 years.
Yeah, and I'm not a big fan of term limits. I tend to agree with the points made. I would actually rather see every state adopt a nonpartisan redistricting system that would at least make the House more competitive. I mean, that's one of the reasons why, folks stay so long in the House, is because they're in safe districts, and unless they have a primary, they're never going to lose their seat. The one area where sometimes I find myself thinking about term limits is when we get into things like criminal justice reform, marijuana legalization, tech issues. So we sort of watch these folks that have been in legislators or in Congress for 30 years talk, resisting the idea that maybe we shouldn't throw everybody into prison. Maybe we shouldn't prosecute everyone that's got an ounce of marijuana. Maybe, we shouldn't use these hearings about, tech issues to sort of say, hey, what's wrong with my phone? I can't make it work. I mean, these are some of the issues that it might be nice to have some new blood in our legislative bodies that maybe has a better understanding of these issues and maybe isn't sort of beholden to sort of old thinking on crime and technology and other things that are rapidly changing, and where views of Americans seem to be far ahead of the folks who are supposed to be leading us.
I'm really sympathetic to what Todd said, but I also know the 20-something and 30-something Republicans not in the legislature, and they're just as raw that stuff as anybody else. So.
Just give it a shot, Maybe throw a few new people in and hope for the best. I don't know.
The other thing to keep in mind is a lot of the proposals for term limits say, no more than 12 years. Well, the average length of stay in Congress is 11 years now. There are those folks like Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Grassley, who have been there forever, it seems like. But the average length of stay is still less than 12 years.
Yeah, I've heard about some different alternatives, like, I don't know if these are legit, but the idea that you could serve like 2 terms and then you had to kind of take a sabbatical and you could come back if you wanted, or there's like retention elections like we have for judges. Do you guys think any of those are viable?
If you take a sabbatical to go work for Raytheon or an insurance company, I suppose. I don't know. I don't think that politically, I don't think any of this is going to happen. But I think on the list of political reforms you make, and Todd mentions one, which is nonpartisan redistricting, on the list of things you could do to make Congress work better, I would say all of these are pretty low. I mean, I in general, I support term limits, but I don't think that it's really the thing that's going to make it happen.
Or sabbatical at Des Moines University, right?
Maybe it could be like 2 years in Congress and then 2 years at hard labor. I don't know. Maybe it's clear the mind.
So, Erin, before you took the job recently as the Gazette's Des Moines bureau chief, you held a similar position for Lee Enterprises. Could you tell us the difference, if there is much, between these roles?
Not really.
Or you can't tell us, or there's
no.
no.
I mean, there's that little difference. Yeah, no, I'm bound by previous non-disclosure forms. That's no. It's. I told people it's got to be the weirdest, simplest job transition that's ever happened. Same beat, same title, literally covering the same stuff. It was just an exciting opportunity to. And if I could take a chance here to flatter everybody on here and the people pulling the strings behind the strings too, an opportunity to come and work with a great group and of journalists and a great team at a great newspaper. That was what drew me. And now I say that I in my immediate rearview mirror at Lee are also a bunch of great people. And great journalists as well, who I relished working for and would have continued to for a long time, probably. But this was a cool opportunity to work with some people that I respect and admire, and it's been great so far.
Now, do you have any different sorts of, I mean, I know before you were writing for papers more geographically distributed around the state, including Sioux City. And do you have is it different kind of what sorts of topics you're picking up or the audience that you're writing for?
Yeah, not very much, just because of the nature of my beat specifically, because even though I'm working for a different company, different papers, I'm still covering state government more broadly. I was never reporting on Sioux City or on Davenport or on Waterloo. I was reporting on state government for those papers. So that hasn't changed for the most part. Now it's a little different where a great example was yesterday. If you're covering a committee hearing on a bill and the Cedar Rapids police chief is there, that's a little bit more important now than it was 2 months ago, where I was on the watch out for the Davenport police chief or something, So only to very minor degrees has that even really changed.
Now, you're a Wisconsin native, and you graduated from the University of Wisconsin at Platteville, and you're a Green Bay Packers fan. I know this from Twitter, especially on Sundays. But
and Erin has left the chat.
I know that you are also president of the Iowa Capitol Press Association. Earlier this month, the Republican leadership of the Iowa Senate decided to prohibit the media from, setting up in the Senate chamber, instead putting reporters and photographers in the gallery behind and above the lawmakers. I was wondering if you had any examples of how this has affected reporting so far in the legislative session.
Yeah, I mean, just broadly, it's tough to work from the Senate. And in fact, for the most part, I haven't been. We can work from the House floor. So even though a lot of the times I'm responsible for covering what's going on in the Senate, I've been working out of the House and then going to those Senate committee meetings when they happen. And I haven't had to worry about floor debate yet, but when they do, I'll have to make that choice. Do I go and work up in the gallery, or do I stay in the House and plug in my headphones and listen to the stream online? It's just not worth it to be over in the Senate and be upstairs in the gallery. There's nothing to be gained by being up there. I'm separated from those legislators. I'm separated from those people that help me do my job better, so I can talk to them and get information and insight from legislation, or catch staff to know what's going on throughout the day. Can't do that from the gallery. So it's absolutely pointless for me to be up there, which is what we talked about when we tried to convey to Senate leaders when they were making this decision. And so, yeah, even when I'm covering in the Senate, I'm mostly working from the House. If that kind of spells out what I think of the situation.
So is there any recourse, or is it just they're in charge, they get to set the rules and you deal with it?
It's much more B than A. If there are any attorneys watching who think there is some recourse, I look for my email address or phone number.
Katie, put that 1-800 number at the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, please call. it's not a First Amendment issue in that they're not barring us from covering them. We're still in the building, we're still in the room, we're still in the chamber, so we can still observe and report, and we will, and we'll all continue to do that to the best of our ability. And I'm proud of the work that I've done and that all my colleagues have done in spite of these challenges. So I don't think there's much in the way of recourse there. To their credit, they did at least grant us a meeting to talk about these issues and let us tell them why we think it was a bad idea, not only for us but for them. And the House was making a similar consideration. We had a similar meeting with them, so we were appreciative of that. Obviously, the House decided to go one way and the Senate the other.
I think one thing that sometimes people don't understand is, I've gotten a lot of emails and phone calls from people who think we're just sort of whining about not being able to sit at the press bench in the Senate chamber. But, I've only been at the Capitol one day this session, but in that day, a number of legislators came to the press bench because they wanted to talk to a reporter. And that's not unusual at all. Most days somebody comes by and says, hey, I'm running a bill in subcommittee. I think you'll find it interesting. Or they'll come to you after the subcommittee meeting and talk to you more about it because they want to make sure what their intent is clear to you. So it's not necessarily that we want to be there just to be there and be close to the action, almost famous, I guess. But it really limits their interaction with the media to their disadvantage, and to the disadvantage of our readers and their constituents.
Yeah. If I could just add on that, I kind of glossed over that early, so I thank James for bringing that up. This is, and I've said this in multiple interviews and public events and whatever else, this is not about the media versus politicians, elected officials. This is not about us throwing a temper tantrum over losing our cushy front row seats. This is 100% about us being able to do our job the best we can, which at the end of the day makes our work better, which makes our readers more informed. That's all this is about. And it is inarguable that we can do our work so much better from that chamber floor than we can separated from those folks upstairs in the upstairs gallery. Like James said, it's a constant back and forth. And I've had the same experience throughout this session. I have been up there most days, and that steady stream is every day a lawmaker stops by or passes by, and I can stop him or her and ask them about a bill, get clarification, find out where it's going in the process. Those interactions are constant throughout a casual day, throughout every day at the Capitol, and they are so invaluable. It's not about us being down there so we can stick a microphone in someone's face and try and get them to sound stupid. It really is a very important working relationship, and I know that it makes our work better when we're there, and that's all this is about. We can talk about, there's logistical things too about having equipment up there amidst the public and cords running where people are trying to walk through and being able to hear well. We can get into all that, and there's all that kinds of stuff too. But the most important thing is that access, that interaction, that accountability. Those lawmakers are accountable to us when we're right there and can talk to them. And it goes both ways. We're accountable to them. If we write something that they don't like, they can come right over to us. And this has happened already this session. Perfect story. If they don't like something that we write, they can come to us. That has already happened to me this session from a senator who had to come over to the House to tell me about it.
He knew where to find you, though. That's good.
Yeah.
So January 11th, Governor Kim Reynolds gave her condition of the state address, and among several priorities she outlined was a 4% income tax, which would be the same flat tax, the same for all tax brackets. So obviously such a plan is simpler, but it means lower income people are paying the same share of their income as wealthier folks. Wanted to just ask you guys one question I had is just given that low tax rate, if this were to go forward, we have a surplus in the state right now. Wouldn't we burn through that pretty quickly and then have an issue of like funding major priorities in the state?
So I'll start this one because I've been doing a fair bit of reporting on this. And to anybody watching, forgive my wandering eyes because I pulled up my story here. So I got my Cliff Notes in front of me. So I'm not forgetting anything. But that's a great question, Erin. And the different plans kind of attack that differently. The governor's plan is assuming revenue growth will cover any reductions, and then there is the taxpayer trust fund, which has roughly $1 billion in it, and they're leaving that as a sort of safety net where if revenue doesn't grow at the rate they expect it to, and they built it on historical rate increases, so that they're not expecting anything they consider to be too high. If that doesn't happen, if revenue doesn't grow, then they've got that taxpayer trust fund to soften the blow, and they would put that into the general fund to help cover any losses. The House plan straight up uses the taxpayer trust fund right from the start. They backfill, however you want to call it, put in about half of the projected reduction, and then expect the rest to be covered by growth. The Senate plan is a little more aggressive. They are expecting the growth, and they're not using the trust fund either. In fact, they've dedicated that for even more tax reductions down the road. So theirs is a little more optimistic / aggressive. With all of those, there's a certain element of risk. So that's a fair question to ask. We have roughly an $8 billion state budget right now, and these plans would all reduce by revenue by between $1.5–2 billion, so up to a fourth of the current state budget. So if that growth doesn't happen, then there's going to be some big adjustments that need to be made, either through the taxpayer trust fund or through reductions in state spending.
And so the Senate plan funds the Iowa Natural Resources and Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund basically by raising the sales tax, but they end local option sales taxes. Is that correct?
That's correct. They basically swap one out for the other. Yep.
So schools and cities would no longer be able to have a sales tax.
The school SAVE stays, which is the school.
Okay. All right. That's what I wondered.
It's just lost.
Okay. So no more local option sales taxes. So Cedar Rapids plans to keep, funding their streets for the next, 10 or 20 years. Yeah.
Sorry, let me just for clarification.
This is a press conference, Erin. We need to answer these questions.
And now we're getting into the weeds too. So I apologize for boring people to tears, and hopefully I'm getting this right. So what the Senate plan is to get rid of lost, but increase the sales tax by 1%, and essentially replace one with the other. So the sales tax increase, 5/8 of that will still go back to local governments like Lost did. 3/8 will go to the Water Quality Conservation Fund. And then the other 3/8, they are saying they won't lose out on either. They'll make that up with general fund spending. So it's a shell game, right? That's what they call that shifting and moving things around. So
don't look too closely at the magician's hands.
The quiz is in a half hour, so be ready.
So one of our listeners has asked just to find out what the various panelists think of the plan, the 4% flat tax.
Well, I think there's a certain amount of fairness appeal, maybe, in saying we're all going to pay the same thing. It doesn't matter whether you're a lowly paid reporter, or you're a fat cat at the bank, or the tech company. We're all going to pay the same rate of taxes. It doesn't take a mathematician to figure out that the person with a higher income can afford more than a 4% tax rate, and it can afford 4% much more easily than the person who's working 2 minimum wage jobs to make it. So it sounds good, but it's not progressive. And if you're a low wage worker, even if you're somewhere on the bottom rungs of middle class, you're probably going to end up paying more unless they put some deductions in this, and then it's not really a flat tax. But and most of the flat tax proposals that we've seen in the past had sort of a minimum income before you paid any tax at all, and without that, then it really becomes problematic for those lower wage workers and people who aren't making. I think right now, people making about $50,000 a year, some of them aren't paying, 4%. So, it's going to be a tax increase for a lot of Iowans.
Yeah. So there's two things that Jim summed it up pretty well, and I'll just kind of add to it a little bit. Proponents generally just say simple and fair. It's simple. It's easy to understand. In contrast to the current code, where there's, I think, is it 8? I'm trying to look at them here, 8 or 9 tax rates in Iowa, depending on where you are, and then there's deductions and all that kind of stuff, and it's hard to kind of calculate. And the flat tax is the old, you can fit it on a postcard argument. And then to what James said, that everybody pays the same. What the critics of a tax plan will say is, again, as Jim said, it's much easier for someone at the higher end of the wage spectrum to pay, much easier for them to pay 4% on taxes than it is lower. They could easily pay much more and still be comfortable. The other criticism you'll hear is when you enact a cut like this, when you go from one system to the other, it's going to disproportionately benefit those higher wage earners because they're paying. So for example, right now, the top income tax rate in Iowa is just over 8.5%. So they're going to get their rate cut in more than half. Whereas if you're more in the middle, you're around 4 or 5% income tax rate right now. So you're getting a tax cut of 1% or 2%. So it's a much bigger benefit to the higher wage earners. So that's what the criticism is. At the end of the day, it ultimately is about having enough money in your accounts to run your state, and that's something that goes back to Erin Jordan's first question, and that we don't know for multiple years.
Well, and that's they sort of push the big question off into future years. It's like, okay, we're going to do these tax cuts, and eventually, the House plan, you're going to have this income tax elimination fund, and so you're going to continue to do tax cuts until you eventually eliminate the income tax. While the personal income tax is a giant chunk of general fund revenue. So if you are going to eliminate that down the road, 2027 or whatever their goal is, there's going to have to be a plan at some point, revealing how that's going to work, where the revenue is going to come from. I mean, they're talking about revenue growth, paying for taxes in the interim, tax cuts in the interim. But when the tax cuts are done and the income tax is eliminated, where does the revenue come from? Are we going to raise sales taxes? Is there some other plan? What is the state going to stop doing that it's doing now that it's paying for? I mean, so this is sort of, yes, we're cutting taxes. We want to eliminate the income tax cut, but there's no explanation now, and probably we won't see one for a long time, as to what the world looks like in Iowa after the income tax is eliminated, how we pay for state government, education, universities, public services, all of those things that we pay for now predominantly with income tax.
I'm all for a flat tax. I think 0 is a lot flatter than 4. 4 is just 4% too high. But my worry is that if I don't really trust them to stick with that, and so Iowa has been over a long span of time has been pretty bad about on several different categories of taxes. The rate is high, but there's so many cutouts and deductions, et cetera, credits that the effective rate isn't actually that high. And so politicians love to say they're cutting taxes, but then they also love to use the tax code to give certain people preferential treatment. So whether that's businesses or individuals, in Reynolds' most recent condition of the state, she talked about eliminating a bunch of retirement taxes, and I'm all for that. But you're still picking and choosing winners through the tax code. So if it was really a flat tax, I think that would be interesting, but I don't really trust them to do that.
Well, there's talk of, sort of non-specific talk about, we're going to get rid of some, we've got tax credits, we've got exemptions, we have these programs where businesses qualify for this tax cut or that tax credit. But I mean, yeah, the track record, they've appointed committees to explore this, and the committees would meet one time, and, economic development interests would basically say, we need all of these because we're in competition with the rest of the country. And if you don't have, the research and development credit, for instance, well, tech firms will move out of Iowa and locate elsewhere where they can get that benefit. So, I mean, they just, once they gave these away, it's become exceedingly difficult to pull them back because you've got the interests that were, successful in getting them in the first place have been largely successful in keeping them, regardless of whether the state knows if these credits and exemptions have actually yielded the sort of economic development that was promised when they were put in place. So, I mean, that's going to be, I'll that's one of those things I'll believe when I see. I actually believe they'll eliminate the income tax before they'll actually get rid of business tax credits. I think the one is probably easier than the other, because I think businesses are like, hey, we'd like to have the corporate tax cut, and we'd like to keep the tax credits if that's okay with you guys. And I think it's we haven't seen any legislative resolve, particularly among Republicans, to basically tell those folks no.
Well, and we'll get a test run of that, because that is in the Senate proposal.
Yeah.
From the business side, they lowered the corporate tax rate, but then they also plucked out a few. Now, not a ton of them. I think they said it's $141 million worth. So it's certainly not every tax credit that's out there, but they did pick a few to cancel, and we'll obviously hear from those stakeholders, I'm sure, during the legislative process. So it will be interesting to see if that kind of thing has any legs, because Todd's absolutely right. It's one of those things. Everybody's for streamlining the tax code and wanting to get rid of tax credits, just not theirs, just not mine. Just don't get rid of mine. All those other ones are terrible. Yeah, we need to get rid, but keep mine.
There isn't a room in the Capitol big enough to hold the number of lobbyists who will be at that subcommittee hearing to defend their tax credit.
It's going to be virtual.
And now
it'll break the internet.
The internet's not big enough, yeah.
And now Hilton Coliseum welcomes the Iowa Senate Ways and Means Committee.
All right, we're going to move on from the tax code to teachers.
Oh, thank goodness.
In Governor Reynolds' condition of the state, she was careful to praise teachers, but she criticized administrators and school boards for pushing their worldview on students. And I think this was specifically focused on books, which has been a big topic, books that Republicans consider inappropriate, obscene for school libraries. I wonder, is this, mainly a topic kind of just to fire up Republican voters, or are we going to see some bills along this front in this session?
Yes and yes.
Yeah. There are already a number of bills that kind of go along with some of the general rhetoric we're hearing about schools and school boards and what's being taught. And I don't think we've seen all of them yet, but yeah, I mean, and some of this is, sort of the result of parents who have genuine concerns about what's being taught at school and how it's being taught. Some of it is sort of, again, is fueled by just the anger parents have about mask mandates and those sorts of things in their schools, and in school versus, in person versus virtual learning, all those sorts of things. It's all, and it's just coming to a head with a lot of these folks that so they're just sort of lashing out at all these things: mask, books, curriculums, not getting their way. And I don't know how much of it the legislature will get done and before people are, get interested in something else. But right now, there are going to be a lot of bills addressing these so-called problems.
I'm interested to see if they do pass a bill in both chambers, what the governor is willing to sign, or if she makes statements before they get to that point, because even before these bills were filed in the last couple of weeks, there's been lawmakers talking about this over the interim and in the first couple of days of session. And in her condition, the state speech, she didn't go as far as they've gone. She basically said that she wants transparency of curriculum, which I'm pretty sure is already a thing, and it certainly should be a thing. And then she wants, basically parents to be able to make their voices heard on these issues, which they can already do. Anyone can contact administrators. Anyone can contact the school board. The question is, what do administrations and school boards do from there? In some cases, before this even really rose to the state level, school boards have been, in some cases, affirming having those books. In some cases, they've been removing them. I think that's really tricky areas for school boards to get into. I think school boards ought to have that power, though. Based on what Reynolds said in her speech of what she thought the solution was, that's already the case. I don't think they really need to change anything. So I think James is right. Certainly, there's lawmakers who are going to push on this really hard.
Yeah, Adam raises a real good point there. And if I could finish the thought, what Governor Reynolds said and proposed were there was some pretty big space in between there because what she actually proposed legislatively, policy-wise, is not much of a change from current practice. About the only things that were different when she talked about transparency and curriculum and library materials and this and that, all that stuff's already required. The only thing new about it would be that it has to be put online. That would be required. And then it created this new process whereby if a school board didn't respond within 30 days, that the matter would go before the state education board. So what she said in her condition of the state sounded pretty strong and critical in some ways, but what she proposed legislatively was fairly mild. Now, she's not the only one proposing legislation, as James noted. There's any number of bills, and we probably haven't. I agree, we haven't seen the last of them, and it'll be interesting to see what, if any, of those. Obviously, bills like that get introduced at a great rate at this point of the session. What will be interesting as the session moves along is how many of those actually gain traction, how many of those bills leaders are actually willing to let advance, how many have support within the wider caucus, and do any of those get close to making it to the governor's desk?
Well, and the governor has made it clear that she doesn't agree with some of the comments that have been made by, for example, Senate President Jake Chapman, who talked about the sinister agenda. When she's been asked about that, she's been very quick to say, "I didn't say that. That wasn't me."
Yeah, that's.
Yeah, I noticed in the speech.
We know that.
I noticed in the speech she was very careful to praise teachers, give them $1,000 bonus. But, the administrators and school board are the baddies, even though a lot of them, used to be teachers. But.
And if I could touch on that real quick, when you talk to teachers, that they will say that while that may have been the way the governor phrased it, to them, it doesn't feel like that's a distinction. And I can, if I can allow myself to be a little personal on this one too, I can empathize with that because when I hear people yell about the media and the enemy of the public and this and that and all the darn media, and then someone comes up afterwards and says, "Well, I wasn't talking about you." that doesn't help a whole lot. Honestly, I appreciate the sentiment, but the just so folks know, that doesn't make me feel any better, because the screaming mob doesn't make that distinction. So it really doesn't help.
Well, this is a nice Republicans see this as a nice wedge issue. They can portray Democrats as purporting some, worldview that is going to indoctrinate their children into God knows what. And public school teachers aren't generally on their side politically, so if you can throw them under the bus, that's not such a big deal. The governor is sort of trying to use this issue as a nice argument for why we need scholarships for private schools to public school students, because God knows you want to get out of these schools where this worldview is being pushed and these books are on the shelves. So it's all fitting nicely. Once Glenn Young can use this to great effect in Virginia, Republicans across the nation got the signal that if we go after school books and these sort of things, and anyone who opposes them as being against parents' rights, then we can make some hay and get some votes, and this is good political fodder. And I think that's what we're seeing here and in a lot of states.
So we're winding down in our time a little bit, so I want to make sure I get in at least a couple of the audience questions. A question on the Senate race, the Democratic nomination for the race against Senator Grassley, person who wrote in both on YouTube and through our other question avenue. So we got to ask, what do you see in the dynamics of the Democratic nomination between Abby Finkenauer and Mike Franken?
I'll just say real quick, I see it similarly to what, from Mike Franken's perspective, what he faced 2 years ago when he ran in that primary, and Teresa Greenfield was kind of the quote unquote establishment pick, or the favorite, or the more well-known name, and he had to kind of fight an uphill battle as a lesser known candidate. Obviously now he's got a little more name recognition, having run that campaign, at least within the Democratic Party. He certainly does. But I think there's still those forces that you're fighting against when it seems like the National Party and other more established Democrats are lining up behind another candidate, in this case, Abby Finkenauer. So I think that's the challenge for Mike Franken once again, is to overcome that.
Well, and Franken can point back to that and say, well, how did that work out for you? Because Teresa Greenfield certainly is not a U.S. senator today, and didn't come close to winning, and maybe national Democrats ought to stay out of this stuff.
I think there's less involvement by those national groups. I mean, there are some.
Yeah.
Emily's List, for example, has weighed in, and some of the groups that are not going to endorse Mike Franken, but he feels like the Democratic Party and its various organizations are not putting their thumb on the scale this time to the degree that they did 2 years ago when Teresa Greenfield won the nomination. So I think he feels better about that. I hear a lot of people talking about him more so than I heard 2 years ago when he ran. And obviously, he has more name recognition now. People have gotten to know him. I think it's, there are other candidates running, but those are the two that I hear mentioned.
Yeah, I think it will come down to them, and that's probably good for Franken. If you've got a two-way race, you can suck up more of the air in the room. But their resumes are certainly different, and I think just because Finkenauer is seen as so establishment, that he's kind of taken on this posture of more left-leaning or more progressive than her. But on the issues, I don't necessarily see that in a strong way. He's not a Bernie Sanders guy or anything like that. He's been very clear to say that he's against the defund police movement, for example. So yeah, they have different backgrounds, but as far as where they are on the issues, I don't see like a serious debate going on.
All right, I wanted to just shift probably to one more topic here for the night, and this is a fun one. Representative Bobby Kaufman of Wilton gave an address this week to the Convention of States group. It sounds like it was in the Capitol Rotunda. Is that right, Erin?
That is correct.
All right. And at the end of the address, he said he sent out a message to what he said were, quote, the gun-grabbing, freedom-hating, over-regulating, civil liberty violating tyrants. He gave them, the double bird. And he later was questioned about who were these said tyrants, and he said the federal government. So just wanted, a couple questions. Do you know specifically if there are any federal measures he was speaking about? And will this gesture overall be a good thing for Bobby Kaufman or a bad thing?
Well, it's gone viral, so it's probably been a good thing for Bobby Kaufman. He certainly likes the attention. He's already been called out by some conservatives who say that that's not showing leadership. And I would love to hear what his father, the chairman of the Iowa Republican Party, thinks about his actions. I think you're muted, Adam.
I would find it hard to believe that the Kaufmans didn't discuss it beforehand. I mean, he went there and planned to do that, but there's a lot of people pearl clutching over it. I think that's kind of, I don't know, that's a little bit self-righteous. I think it was fine to do. I think the idea of decorum in politics is a little bit overstated. But I would say, I mean, Republicans are hypocrites on this. That last year they were chiding a Democrat for wearing jeans on the legislative floor. And so that wasn't necessarily Bobby Kaufman, but if you're going to say that there's this sense of decorum and civility inside the state house, then you should be more consistent about it. But I think it's fine to flip people off. I think it's fine.
Well, the Iowa Republican Party called out Abby Finkenauer last week for using damn and jackass in comments she made.
That's an even better.
There were no asterisks on those fingers.
Well, maybe she was talking about that new movie. Isn't there a new Jackass edition?
I'm just, I from a free speech standpoint, yeah, go ahead and fly your birds. I'm just worried what, if we're on a, how are you going to top that? I mean, are we going to start having pyrotechnics at the end of speeches? Or are we going to start,
nothing that will set off the Capitol smoke alarms, please. Those are off enough as it is.
I mean, you got the double bird. It's hard to do the triple bird. You could, unless you have some help, you get some people up there, maybe like a whole line of birds. I don't know. It's I feel like there's going to be an escalation. So we'll see what happens.
Well, to finish off the show in a minute, I'm going to ask our panelists if they have a better gesture they'd like to end our show with. But I wanted to just let you know our next Pints and Politics is scheduled for April 21st. So I know it's nearly 3 months off, but hopefully by that time, Omicron has gone away and we can be back together in person. That's our hope for that event. The venue is still determined, but we'll share that information as soon as we have it. I appreciate you all being with us tonight, and I appreciate our panel, Todd Dorman, Adam Sullivan, James Lynch, and our special guest, Erin Murphy. And so, please go ahead, panelists. What kind of gesture would you send the group off with tonight? All right. Well,
Nixon.
Todd's old Pints and Politics pin for longtime fans of the show.
On Wisconsin. On Wisconsin.
What is that, a butterfly?
that would be like this.
Yeah. There's no crossover. That's a W for Wisconsin and winning.
What was it? This is like a dog, like a shadow puppet.
Oh, well, until next time, I will sign you off just with a little bow. And thanks a lot and have a great night, everyone.
Thanks.